It's Saturday, baby.
Anyway, so we are Saturday Night Sales Swords. Blake.
I'm Dylan.
And I'm Tom. We are primary DM, secondary DM at times, a part-time DM. And this is Ask a DM. You can ask any question in regards to D&D or any tabletop RPG or just general stuff. Characters, players, game mechanics, rules. And if it's a system specific, just let us know because we have played pretty much from you every version of D&D. We've played some other games, GURPS, Dark Heresy.
Dark Heresy.
While mechanically very similar if not identical, certain differences come from certain key terminology and such.
Okay, first question. Anybody have something to talk about here in front?
How do you handle bringing older edition content to 5th edition?
Do you have something specific in mind, or
Just readapting monsters that have I've heard the number systems for 3rd edition are insane damage-wise.
yeah? So yeah, there's no cap. But
I know that magical weapons in 5th are max +3, whereas in older edition can go up to +5. And there's a difference in older editions between a plus magical weapon and a plus non-magical, which would be mastercraft.
Masterwork. Yeah. So great question. My answer would be to playtest a conversion that you've done yourself, and then implement those rulings like with an asterisk at your table. So let's say you want to start bringing in magic items that go beyond +3 in 5th edition. Playtest it a little bit, let them know that hey, this one shot we're going to be doing is basically just kind of playtesting some mechanics. This isn't going to be specific to the campaign. See if they like it, see if you like it, because at the end of the day, remember, the game's about having fun. So if the group's not having fun, then the changes need to be recalibrated.
And you could also try, in the case of, like I said, +5, then have maybe a +3, divide it by 2, and try that out and tweak it because of 5th edition's bounded accuracy, those numbers do matter. In the case of monsters, try to look at similar monsters of that edition and try to sort of use that as a template. Provide your best input for that.
There's also many FAQ forums where people have asked previous questions about certain monsters. What's the CR difference between a Displacer Beast from 4th edition to 5th edition, and how to adjust accordingly?
I think we had one over here, second row. Yep.
For DM, what are some tips that you would recommend for a beginner DM?
So I am functional.
Okay.
I'm sorry, for a beginner DM, as myself, what are some tips that you would tell a younger DM?
Oh, okay, cool question. So for those who didn't hear, what would be some tips you would tell your younger self as you were learning how to DM? The first thing I would kind of critique about myself is take more notes, and that way, and also organize your notes. Don't just sporadically write things down willy-nilly. Don't just not keep track of your encounters and how much reward versus critique you're giving back to your players. Because at the end of the day, helping keep to help keep players in the game, feel the game, you want them to be immersed into the storytelling. And constantly going back and retconning and doing over and maybe refactoring some things can really break that immersion. So take more notes and organize them so they're easier to reference.
I mentioned this yesterday, but modules. Start with pre-generated adventures or modules and just play through those because they're pretty well balanced and they have a variety of enemies that are more for that adventure, and they give you full tidbits for the DM that you can just read, hey, when the players come here, describe this, but here's what's in the room. And then you can always just, like I said, tweak it as you go, maybe up it a little bit or lower it, or swap something in or out.
Don't be afraid to kill a player character who makes an irresponsible decision in character. Sometimes you might want to go, oh, this is my friend, I don't want to kill off this hard-killed character, but sometimes when you fly into a dragon's mouth, you got to remember that the stomach acid is a thing, even in the D&D universe.
some
Okay.
tips you have for upscaling monsters?
Excellent question.
Go ahead first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, when I like to upscale a monster, I actually use a very loose-handed equation for that, whereas I take pretty much the entire party's highest character's HP, and then I increase its damage modifier to about 30 to 40% of what that is. So that way the hits, they really take a bite out, they start feeling the pressure. And also, sheer numbers over, it's like if you could have, CR5 is not bad, but 5 CR5s are a lot worse.
On a side note, and as a little advice on that, be wary of what the creature can do. One common mistake in 5e I noticed from just reading the monster manual straight up is that in the back of the book, like in Appendix B, there's scouts, archers, and they got swords. Basic, something the party come across in the world of an enemy base. At level 1, they are deadly because they have 2 attacks. At range and up close. So keep in mind, like as well with the damage, but how often they can do that damage.
I'm actually going to table my answer until later at the advanced DM's talk because we actually have a whole section about that. Taking lower level monsters and kind of bringing them up to snuff so that you're not having that feel where it's like I worked really hard on this kind of cool monster concept and it's over in 1 round. Is that okay? Are you going to
What
use that
time
one
is
at
that?
6?
What time is that now?
That's going to be 6 o'clock in this room.
All right, thank you.
Today, yeah. You're in front.
Yeah, we were talking about CR rating, the challenge rating. How do you gauge, like, I've heard that challenge rating isn't the best way to gauge how difficult a monster is in relation to a party, because you can have a well-balanced party, fighter, wizard, cleric, or you can have a party of all casters who die in a single hit.
Yeah.
Even though the monster is supposedly weak enough for them to beat.
So I think what I'm hearing from your question is, if not CR, what would I use to try to...
Yes, how would you gauge a monster's effectiveness against a party without outright killing them?
So do you know how to calculate a challenge rating by including multiple monsters, the 2-to-1 ratio?
I've tried reading through it and it's not really sunk in quite yet.
Okay, so it's a pretty simple escalation. Hopefully I can explain it to you a little better than what the book does. But basically, any 2 monsters of the same CR can click together to create a CR of that level +1 or +2 depending on the system. So for example, if I have 1 CR1 goblin and 1 CR1 goblin, they can click together to be roughly a CR 1.5 CR2. That's going to change a lot based off of the hit die of the monster. If I wasn't using challenge rating to gauge the overall effectiveness of an encounter, my first go-to would be total hit point pool. So if you look at the total number of hit points available for the party versus the total number of hit points available in the encounter, that may be a guideline to go off of, because that would help to factor in that casters generally have poorer hit die versus martial characters who generally have a chunkier hit die. And then that would translate over to monsters as well, because different types of monster templates have different types of hit die. So I would use hit die instead of CR.
I would start with the fact that CR is bullshit. It's very misleading in most editions. It's a good template, and the designers, they built it around whatever standard party they decide would be a standard party. So one thing I would say to add on to that is that look at the party's capabilities. So in the case of all casters, are they blasters? Are they buffers? Are they debuffers? Are they a mix? Can they just cast banishment and remove one of the enemies? Do they have access to that during that day? And then look at what kind of abilities does the creatures have? Because, like I mentioned yesterday on the Bastion example, where it has a very low CR in the book. Because generally, without its petrification, it's not that hard to fight. But if your party has no means to undo petrification, that could be a TPK very easily, in which case now it's more dangerous than it should be. And there are other cases where I've seen higher CR monsters that are along with the party. But it comes down to what does the party have and how effective are they using it.
Another way I'd do it is looking at, say you have a party of spellcasters you used. Is this creature's touch AC going to be like 18 to 19 on a spell attack roll? If so, that might be like, might need to lower that or adjust that, because that would be too strong for your party if they're all crit fishing on top of what could potentially be high HP. So I would feel comfortable saying just feel free to adjust stats on the fly if you need to.
Do you know what touch AC is from Pathfinder 3.5 and 3?
No.
So it's a different type of defense. In those editions, they have 3 versions. There's your standard AC, your touch, and your flat-footed, and they basically dictate more or less like different types of attacks and how they function. That's more or less emulated in 5th edition with the increase of saving throws. Rather than just having a core 3, there's a saving throw associated with each test. Yeah.
Once again, sometimes I forget that I go into 3.5, 4th edition Pathfinder, stuff like that, as opposed to most people are probably playing 5th edition.
Actually, real quick, everybody, can you raise your hand if you're currently playing or attempting to run or wanting to play 5th edition versus anything else? Okay.
So
And yeah, we'll keep that in mind. Can you raise your hand if you're playing something other than D&D 5th edition? We got a couple. Okay, so we're playing Pathfinder. Is anyone else playing Pathfinder 1E or 2E? A couple of hands. Cool. All right, so that seems to be the close.
But yeah, we'll keep our in mind for the edition specific. Okay. But excellent question. Any other questions so far? Go ahead.
I wanted to know, when you are world building and first setting out on building a campaign, what are the steps that you take to ensure that the world feels concrete to the players and that everything seems as it should?
That's an excellent question. So there's a famous saying that those who enjoy walking will love the destination more than those who love achieving.
So it's the journey, not the destination.
Yeah, kind of. So the first thing that I would focus on is like write down and solidify backstory and kind of divine content. Actually, one of our players from the Saturday night group had a similar concept where he wanted to start creating his own campaign setting. So I told him start with dividing out the pantheon and the games between the deities and how the gods work. Because a lot of that storytelling is going to dictate how their followers act in the world. And a lot of that is going to dictate like laws and things inside the world and how cities look upon good versus evil versus neutral. So once you kind of have that divine comedy outlined, it doesn't need to be, like you don't need volumes of it written down, but I would definitely have like general flow charts of influence laid out. And then from there move into building a world and what it would look like in that kind of setting. And then from there you can continue to kind of add more meat to the skeleton. I always say when I'm teaching somebody how to DM, start with a skeleton and then flesh it out. So have big, bold, key concepts that are easy to remember and they're easy to take notes on. So that your players, once they get into the world, they can take notes and kind of delve into the setting that you've started. But a lot of that can just be like, the sun god is non-binary, or like, this pantheon is or isn't present. Like, you can have some of those main key features emulated in the game as part of core content. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. It's funny because I usually do the opposite of what you said. I decide what the world has, I decide how the world is, and then I like to go down the line and try to figure out what would create this type of world, and then build accordingly. Okay, well, if these have giant doors, there were probably giants here at some point. If there were probably giants in here at some point, there was probably a fight. And it just kind of worked down that way, in person.
I've also added lots of coffee, caffeine, helps. But more seriously, kind of have a general idea of kingdoms, hamlets, cities, how they would generally just operate. What kind of government leadership is it a monarchy? Is it a council? Is it tribalistic? And from there you can it helps kind of branch off to build, and then you can just change the details of, well, this hamlet does this, but then this hamlet I can change it. So let's say this hamlet is all about their farmers and such. They're going to praise more about a god or goddess of agriculture. Well, this is more of the warrior type training city, and they're going to be more of like a god of war or something. And that can influence how the citizens will interact, how they will party with each other. So then just, yeah, keep it generalized and kind of branch out as need be. And anything off what you both are saying, the players, when they're interacting, will be helping you in the back going, yeah, we're going to have this thing, we're going to have this. That's a great idea. Yeah, oh yeah, it's always been the
Yeah, never let them know you're improvising. And you'll always be the best DM.
Actually, on that note, if I could have a follow-up real quick. You say that you go off of the players a lot. How much percentage do you do before the players even know the concept, and how much do you do at the table?
Honestly,
60.
honestly, I always try to emulate the amount of effort that my players are putting into the game. So if I'm with a group and they don't really seem that interested in the lore and they just want to play math Yahtzee and beat stuff, then that's really all I'm going to prepare for. Because if I'm not really preparing the right kind of content they're not going to be interested in, then nobody's having fun. But if I'm with a group that really likes backstory, they like journaling about their character, they like taking notes, then I'm going to really work on the lore side of things. Now the difficult part is where you have a couple of people who like one end of the spectrum and a couple of people who like the other end of the spectrum, especially in group 7. So you have to find that happy medium where there's enough combat and there's enough dice rolling and enough bookkeeping and enough lore to make everybody happy. And it's really a hard balance, and that's something that you as a DM will need to feel out for the people you're playing with. And that may change from group to group, and that's totally acceptable.
I do about 20 to 30%. I plan. And then I leave enough room this way if they come up with something or pull something off that I had no preparations for it. I have room to say, yes, of course that's it.
Yeah, that's totally the way that works.
But that's how you integrate improv, but you do it in a way that they don't even know. You're like, yep, we found it, that's where it was, we're great.
And if you want to understand my improvisational DM style, I recommend you go online and look up the gazebo.
Easy story.
Yep, 100% out. It's like, it is now, start rolling initiative.
Do you have a question?
Do you also have any tips for transferring a non-DM, like a non-modulated story into a D&D setting?
To a specific setting or
Yes,
logic?
so I want to do an Owls of the Wool campaign.
Okay.
So I'm transferring all of that information into a D&D, for a campaign. So do you have any tips or ideas for that?
Yeah, actually the very first game we ever played was under him, and it was D&D 4th edition, but it was Star Wars / 40K? Or is that the second?
No, that was it.
Yeah,
It was like a whole bunch of sci-fi stuff just thrown in there. Let's have fun.
and we still remember fun. But the trick is to keep in mind that certain things are not going to translate over. And you're going to have to adjust for that system. So if you're using 5th edition, you have to keep that math in mind, because once you start tweaking that core design, things start getting overpowered and fall apart. And at that point, well, then you should have played a different system that would have better adapted.
I think this, if you go back to something we answered a little earlier about taking notes and effectively play testing. So something we talk about with our beginner DM groups is have a session 0, where session 0 isn't really any role playing, it's more or less just bookkeeping and getting everything set up. You're probably going to want to have a session -5, where you just have okay, we're going to play test how Owls with class levels is going to work. And you're going to give yourself a couple of sessions to work out the bugs, so to say, of how these mechanics are going to change. So are they going to be responsible for a divine focus if they're a cleric? How are they going to hold or present their holy symbol? Are undead going to be capable of being owls as well? How are all these new things going to be affecting the system? All of that's going to have to be worked out through play playtesting is going to be solidified through note-taking and documentation so that you can reference it later in the campaign. So I guess to summarize, like, play test it a lot, take plenty of notes, but also like get feedback from your players. If you think the way something should be is really simplified and you kind of like the direction it's going, like let's say somatic components for owls, they have to do them with their feet or their wings, right? Not necessarily both. Play test that. And if it comes down to be like, well, you can't really, in that case, cast spells while you're flying, because you need your wings to fly, you would basically eliminate all spellcasters while in aerial combat, which could be a huge nerf to the party, right? Like if your wizards or clerics start being like relied on heavily. So do a session like -5, play test some rules, get some feedback from like what they want to do. Go to session -4, okay, make those changes, document them. Yeah, and slowly work my way up until you feel ready to start that campaign with that group.
Tom, what's your thoughts on it?
For me, it's, everybody, when he gets into a long rant, feel free to drink. It's a game like you play, and it's real fun. Thank you, don't you, Daddy? So, I promise in my comment, flavor text and fluff are my favorite ways to take common things like that are popular and move them into D&D or just RPG in general world. So like, if we were doing Star Wars, how I would do it is, you want to play a Jedi Knight? You're a Paladin.
Yeah.
You want to play a Sith Lord like Palpatine? That sounds like a wizard to me. He doesn't use it. He doesn't use lightsaber. He uses it.
I'm kind of going to preview their sheets because it's also kind of a one-shot, so I don't want
Yeah. Well, the beauty of it is when you're trying, if you're going to try to do a whole campaign off of it, my recommendation would be run 3 or 4 individual one-shots with that group and try instituting the rules you want to try, or just a little bit of.
That's kind of basically what I'm going to do. We're
Yeah.
kind of one-shotting it, and then if they want it to be a campaign, I'll put more.
Yeah, that should work out well.
Tylenol and alcohol, and DM's best friend. How old are you, sir? Alright.
Any other questions? All right, we have one in the back. Just please speak up because we're going along.
Okay, that's good?
Yep, that's good.
All right. I have a question about like weapons. Like, what would you need to know to create like a weapon from scratch? Like, I know there are like certain bases, like weapon classes, like short swords, regular swords, long swords. But what's a good place to start, and how should you build one?
Oh, basically custom item
A
creation.
custom weapon or item.
Okay. Custom items. So actually, I think the DMG, I don't know what page or what section, at least in one of the editions, usually gives the advice of look for a similar item that's already in the system and use it as a template. But if, let's say there is one, you're bringing something in that's not in that edition, can't find it. One trick I found, look through the other editions because of the expansion that they have. Like we steal a lot from 4th edition, 3.5, and 5e games because those systems, I think 4e had 3 or 4 item books alone. And there's just troves of stuff that some of them actually do translate really well into 5e. And you can just change the name, change a little keyword here, and there you go. But the balance is the key thing. So look for a similar item to compare it with. So it's not, now it's not just an artifact, now that's just overpowered.
One thing, especially when it comes to 5e, that I really like is if you're going to build, if you're going to have your players homebrew the item, or they're going to build the item, I usually like to attach the skill check of like arms and armament on top of imbuing it with a spell that has a similar feature. So like if I was building rust gauntlets, yep, you need to be able to make arms and armor. You'd also need the spell rusting grasp, and it would require also the gold value to build. So if you're going to do your home one, I would come up with a spell, an item, and then a skill check in which to actually create that.
Turn it to a quest, basically.
Yeah, turn it into a side.
If you were trying to make a new type of weapon, I would first kind of define what you want it to do before you finalize dice. So if it's going to be a heavy weapon, you at least have a template for what other heavy weapons can do, and you can associate like what dice you would put with that weapon, versus like having it be a light weapon or a two-handed or a least get an idea from where to start based off what category it belongs in and what some other weapons can do. And then from there, if you want to try to make your own magic items, I would start with what the basic spells are available in the core rulebook and what like basic items may not be emulated already. And then try to, again, playtest, document, allow yourself to make mistakes. It's very common for new DMs and young DMs to give away way more powerful items than the party needs. And so there's a lot of retconning that goes on with like, okay, maybe we're going to scrap this campaign and start over, and I'm not going to give you guys as much loot. But I guess my biggest piece of advice if you're trying to make something new is don't be afraid to make mistakes, but also don't be afraid to own up to those mistakes and like tell your party, hey, this is way more powerful than what like level 3 characters should have, so I'm going to nerf it. And when you guys maybe fulfill a series of side quests, or maybe once you repower the weapon somehow, or you go through a quest line, it can get back up to those original stats.
I just was thinking of that as you were saying it. You can always have where if they find the item, they try to identify it with a spell they identify. Or maybe an archmage's like, well, let me look at it. For some reason, they can only get so much information on the item. There's certain elements that are still mysterious, so you can tweak it as you go, and let's say it's really powerful, and you can describe how it's starting to wane in power, in which case you go to the quest of reigniting that power as they level, and where it's more appropriate maybe. Or maybe the final version of it, it locks in place where this is how it is now. And then you can even just tell the player, decide, hey, I'm just play testing it, we're going to play around. Most players will be like, okay, yeah, cool. Well, just let me know when we're changing. Excellent question.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, very much so. Thank you.
Another question?
Here in the front, and then we'll go to the back.
So this question is pretty much to teach all three of you. What are your personal methods for stocking a shop in just any town, big or small, major capitals, or just a roaming merchant? Either a specific formula or a website, or what system you use to determine what goes into what shop?
Okay, you guys want to start?
Well, I'll go with my first one then. I personally, I know that sometimes I make campaigns that are hard to find shops, so I create a little magical guy called Gage who just shows up and delivers things. And what I like to do is I love rolling, so I will pull up just the back of the book, the loot tables, and I will just roll up. Well, this guy's got a couple of mundane items, but he's got 3 or 4 of this big item. And the beauty of that is not every shop is going to stock exactly what the players are looking for, so it doesn't give you that random, privately owned shop sporadicness that you find in the real world.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat on that one.
You can't use me.
I'm not using it. When I have a set shop, I generally decide, okay, this is the commerce of the area, this is kind of resources, so they might have less or more. And I will, so Monday items, basic stuff like a pawn shop, carry shop, you never know what you might find. I'll roll up a list of decent things, and then I'll roll maybe 1 or 2 really high level stuff, and I'll leave 1 slot open, or 2, where the players say, well, do you have anything else in the back? And they're like, oh, well, you know what, let me go check. And I'll have them roll percent, or roll the appropriate dice, and then I'll go through the charts. And if it's something good and appropriate, I was like, oh yeah, I have this. If not, I'll change it out. Because sometimes Universal Blue comes out, and while I'm in very creative players' hands, hope, but if they're looking at their swords, then they don't want the blue. Sometimes though, I did have a player where I got a gauge roll.
Come on in.
And he had enough money to buy it. So I was like, you know what? You really want to spend all your gold? I was like, yes. Like, he has a gauge roll. And that player held off to it, and then he eventually used it.
So if I'm trying to populate a specific shop in a short amount of time, I'll use Don John. It's a website I just work on your Facebook, so you've heard of it. No? DONJON.
I think he's just making up Don Juan.
Yeah. Don John. It is an emulator website. It loads everything from vanilla D&D, 2nd edition, 3rd, 3.5, Pathfinder. Like, it does everything. It can randomize dungeons. It can randomize entire campaigns. And it has magic shop generators on it. And you can set it and break it down by level and availability and even city size. So in most editions, they have an e-commerce cap on what type of items are available in what type of environment, going from like as small as a hamlet all the way up to a raging metropolis. So So if I'm trying to generate a very specific shop on the fly, I use that. There's also pre-generated books that are like the DM's instant magic shop that you can get off of like Kickstarter or Amazon if you want a book just dedicated to magic shop generation. However, my rule of thumb is as long as the item is within the economic threshold of the city, I usually don't care. Like let's say you're in a major metropolis and you're trying to find like a +1 sword, like yeah, that would be available. Feel free to spend the money and buy it. Like if I do anything, I may roll to see how long it takes for like the money to get moved around. Because a lot of the magic items, there are tens of thousands of gold pieces, which in today's currency would be like millions of dollars, and like most people don't have that immediately in like liquidatable assets. So it may, like, yes, you put it in order for this +2 longsword, but it might take a few days for the bank to actually get the coin in hand for you. Yeah, exactly. If they're trying to buy anything outside of the economic threshold of the city, I usually don't allow it, and they'll have to go either quest and find a place to get it. If it's campaign specific or an emergency, like if 6 of your 7 party members got petrified by a basilisk, since that's the example we keep going back to, and that one sole survivor is like, I need 6 oils of stone to flesh right now, I'll be like, okay, you can commission it from a wizard. Just bring in some of the basilisk venom and like he'll get it going, but it might take some time. But like, for the most part, I try not to focus too much on hindering shop mechanics. That's just my personal preference.
Thank you. You have a question right there?
Yeah, what's the best way to kind of either scale up, and I guess inversely scale down your party's foes? Like my party got very lucky and nearly killed the big bad guy on my first encounter with him.
Gotcha. We touched on it a little bit, but adjust the hit points as needed. I like switching over to the minion system 4E. If the fight's going on too long, I'll just say, I don't care what hit points said. After this many more successful hits, this guy's dropping. In the case of the big bad guy, you can use the spell Simulacrum to have lesser versions that are weaker, but still important.
So out of 3 and 3.5, there's this lovely thing called a Divine or Profane bonus. And it's basically just kind of like a Deus Ex Machina, this guy is stronger than he needs to be. It's like similar to an insight bonus. It's just kind of like, yeah, he's Paragon tier, you know, he's the big guy on campus, he's beefier. So you can use that type of bonus mechanically, just like we were saying, to adjust hit points, armor class, attack values, all those kinds of things, without having to then pony up treasure, where you gave him like a +3 longsword, and because the barbarian crit him 6 times in a row, now you have to surrender this +3 longsword to your party. So it's a great way to adjust him without having to give him loot. My biggest piece of advice is, if you're going to adjust your encounters by giving the bad guys loot, and make sure that the party can pick it up. Okay. And so then make sure that it's something that they should be picking up, and you're not regretting surrendering overpowered objects to low-level parties. And between that, use things like an insight bonus, a profane bonus. Maybe he consumes his potions before the fight to get a few buffs in, as he like hears the party moving through his dungeon. I mean, most things that live in dungeons have defenses, and those defenses make noise. And any logical person would be like, oh, there's somebody in my house. Maybe I should drink this potion of bark skin. So that would be my recommendation.
Once again, I just give him 1 or 2 healing spells or some healing potions. I mean, I've seen the entire party in campaigns, just everybody down 5 healing potions. Wait, how did he get 20 extra HP?
Yeah. Whatever the players have.
I'm a player. This is my character. Prepare to die. That's a direct quote, by the way.
Yes, it is.
Definitely be mindful of the resources you give your enemies, because as he pointed out, and your players will, if they succeed, will get them. In fact, there's the Sunless Citadel module from, I think it was originally 3.5 and earlier, but there's a 5e version in Beyond Portal, there is a specific item that one of the net boss has. It's called Shatter Spike, I believe. And it's a sword that it will, when it hits the other enemy's sword or shield, it breaks them instantly. It is a very powerful weapon, but it's appropriate for that module. So if you have that as part of your campaign and they grab that, they now have that item.
Where do you get that, man?
I believe so.
Yeah, that's.
But yeah, so, and we can, you can just adjust or increase the same kind of thing. Good question. Any other questions?
We got a question.
Oh, we got two in the middle.
We'll start with the lady on the
Left.
left.
Okay.
Do you have any favorite DM websites? I know my own always has specified that pop up. What are your favorite sites for looking up information and just DM stuff in general?
For 5th edition
For
specific?
fifth edition specifically.
I was going to ask about modules, so if you want to answer that the same.
Okay. So for the resources, I use this a lot, especially when I'm running one-shots, because they just do everything on the day. Wiki.5e, just search that in Google. It is someone, they're running a wiki that has every book, well, everything from the books, every class, every background, every race. It tells you where it's from. It has all the items, anything that's not. So for the resources, I use this a lot. It has all the magic items. It doesn't have, I don't think it has, I don't think it has monsters on there. It has all the spells, the schools, every spell is getting a breakdown, so it helps players making characters, and it helps them referencing their own material. DM side, DM Skill is also a great resource for additional material. Yeah, they have that.
Once again, I like to find Reddits and subreddits because you get a lot of interesting homebrewed stuff or fun questions. The last time I was on it, my favorite one was, and I've been asking them repeatedly, what happens if you put enemy dead on a pair of leather gloves? He says nothing, but he said, in my campaign, it would actually give you a negative to your dexterity because your gloves would be constantly moving against your fingers.
You got any resources for 5e?
Yeah, so every version of D&D has a standard rules document known as the SRD. A lot of them are open source because the open gaming license associated with D&D. The OGL is what allows us to kind of do this kind of stuff where we can use the names Dungeons & Dragons, Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro, etc., and not get sued for it. Yeah, big thumbs up from the front. So the SRD, Standard Rules Document, is going to cover your main core content. A lot of that will be available online in the form of some kind of wiki. So for example, we play Pathfinder. PF SRD, Pathfinder Standard Rules Document, is basically just a wiki page. It's a website you can go to. It has everything from primary content to third-party content and even homebrew content that's been published and approved. I would stay away from third-party content and homebrew content without thoroughly reading it and understanding it first as a dungeon master. To answer for modules, if I'm looking for new modules to run, I'm not trying to like brown nose or anything, but we're loosely sponsored by Frog God Games. They have a whole bunch of modules. Anytime you buy a physical copy book, you can also get the PDF for free. So you can give a physical book to yourself, and then you can go into your PDF version and print out like dungeon maps for your players. So as they discover floors and everything like that, you can just pass that to the party. Easy reference for them to be like, yeah, we've been here. Oh, we missed that room. We shouldn't go back because it's metagaming. There's also, I do believe, forums on like Reddit and Tumblr talking about modules coming up and to be published. And also check out Kickstarter because there's a lot of third-party and homebrew content that gets published under the SRD, and a lot of that gets crowdfunded through things like Kickstarter or other crowdfunding services, so you can get new, up-to-date, cool, obscure, and by that also stuff your party can't just like Google behind your back and like learn about, and you can bring that to your table.
What was the first thing you said? I'm sorry.
Frog God Games.
Frog God Games.
Yes.
Frog God.
Yeah, so
And actually, they do make stuff for 5th. Everything they have, I think, is also 5e.
They are porting into 5th edition right now. So the campaign we're running is called The Sword of Air. It was written by the main founder of the company, Bill Webb, and he was also one of the primary content creators for the Lost Lands. exported or takes in. We're running the Pathfinder version. They do have it all ported over into 5th edition as well.
So you have this option. And again, DM's Guild, there's a lot of good stuff. I actually picked, DM's Guild, I picked up, and usually they just ask for donations to the creators. Like sometimes it can be about 70 cents or just to create and you want to donate money. I picked up a few one-shots. I ran one on a Halloween a while back. It was a mansion full of were-tigers hunting the party. But they invited them in for a dinner party, not realizing that they were the food. And it was very fun to run, very neat, and it had everything I needed right then and there. I ran something called the False Hydra, and it was a fan-created thing on Reddit. Someone actually statted out the creature and made a little module to help kind of run it. And if you're not familiar with what it does, it's like the silence proper good way.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't want that. But it's like that. The only difference is that when they eat someone, everyone forgets their existence. And it can lead to a nice mystery. But I thankfully I found on DM's Guild where I had maybe a nice template.
Meanwhile, I read The Curse of Strahd, where Strahd had the voice of Cornholio for Beavis Planet.
Yeah, unfortunately the fire jokes, we didn't get that far.
Yeah.
And he ran it serious the entire time. He was going to do that.
Part of the serious, but a big joke at the end.
Just to add on to that, Wizards of the Coast, they're the owners of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. They're owned by Hasbro, and so there's a lot of like crossover content coming. I don't know if you play Magic the Gathering, but like there's a huge crossover from like Magic the Gathering into the D&D universe. So that is also a good source for a lot of modules. If you just go to the D&D website for Dungeons & Dragons, or if you go to Hasbro, they'll have links to it. You can see their library of published content and published modules to pull from as well. You can just also order them off Amazon if you want non-original content.
Also, not to be that guy, but you could also Google free use modules for whatever edition. I've done that. I've done silly stuff like that and came up with gold actually.
Yeah, some of them are really good. People are just like, yeah, please use it. I just let it plug in.
Yeah. If you ever get to a point where you want to publish, check out Drive-Thru RPG.
Yeah.
It's another good website. It's a lot of indie creators who are trying to put stuff up without necessarily having it crowdfunded. So I'll say that again, Drive-Thru RPG. Usually if you ever find like a PDF download of a module or a book, it's actually going to be hosted on that website because they don't really charge the content creators anything. And it's all pay to play basically. So as long as you pay one time for the PDF, you can download as many copies of it as you want, and create an account and everything, and it stores a library and everything.
And they have an excellent resource for both players and DMs on those sites too, because I peruse for both sites.
I'm actually currently playing around with the idea of a deck of card game that would actually help you just a pre-generated one for people who can't find a forever DM like we did. Just, kind of flip out, okay, it's this monster, this room, this world. Just kind of help build a small module.
I think we got time for 2 more questions. Oh, really?
Okay, what time do we start?
Yeah, I thought you go to, this goes to 1.
Yes.
Oh, okay, yeah, we got 14 minutes.
So once again, that is my favorite D&D question, by the way. What time do we start this weekend?
So how do you handle the background stuff, the living world aspect of your campaign? Say your party, like the example you gave or someone else gave, the party runs into the big bad, they almost beat him, but he manages to escape. How do you handle the big bad building themselves back up? Or the party, like, while the party's dealing with another quest, how do you handle that?
What's he doing behind the scenes?
Yes, and how do you handle that? Do you actually do like roles behind the scenes, or do you just make it full story?
Now, I tend to do what makes sense for that build. So let's say it's a lich. A lich is a spellcaster who has made himself the most elite version of the undead, below Orcus, I guess. Anyways, this guy has tons of resources. He has accumulated gold and wealth over the ages. It's immortal. Can't die unless you want its collection. So,
I thought we go to 1 today.
Sure.
Yeah, told me
That's what it's on the schedule.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't get end time, so I just.
No worries.
I'm sorry.
We put up in your
Thank you for the reminder, though. We appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. See you guys.
I take in mind, what does this villain have access to? If they have a fortune
country behind, let's say you basically make the Dr. Doom. He has an entire nation that he has all these resources. I would then pace out, okay, how is he going to approach, like he does butt kicked. All right. How would he react? Would he go instantly, I'm going to knack harder now, or I'm going to play the long game? I like using spies, assassins, bounty hunters, mercenaries, and just stuff, and that's what the party ball, they level up anymore in his level. And then you can have that better big fight.
Yeah, because as they're beating all of the mercenaries in a big set, they get stronger to do them.
Which will also attract other factions in the world.
What I like, what most DMs that I know actually do, and I try to do in my world, is I try to make a responsive world as well. So if your barbarian came at me with a +1 sword, and I survived that fight, it's time to up the armor. If your spellcaster got to me, I'm definitely going to make my reflexes for his spell rolls or my defenses against magical attacks higher as well. And so I would honestly, I just make him almost, and you're the DM, so you can't do this because metagaming is what the DM is. Pretty much just start making responses to everything they went into the last fight, that guy went in with them. So it's like, so if he gets a +5 sword later on, but you're just only prepped for a +1 sword, so you're not like, I have an answer for everything you do. But you're definitely making it feel like, oh, okay, this guy prepped for the fight too.
So like, take some of the biggest moments from the previous fight and make that what the bad guy focuses on.
Exactly, take the big turning points.
Where he lost the fight, like what caused it.
Yeah.
My answer is going to be more for like how the background would work, not necessarily what the big guy would going to do. You use milestone leveling, right? I think that's what we talked about yesterday. So let's say you have a series of events that you've assigned milestone levels to, and those correlate to progress within your campaign. So my recommendation would be set a goal for where you want the party to be before a certain level. I'm just arbitrarily going to throw out 5, because that's kind of where that tier kicks over in 5th edition. Although that's only going to be 4 milestones, because they start at level 1, put 7 events that could trigger a milestone, and when they don't fulfill them, have some kind of negative repercussion lined up to then begin affecting the world. So last year, we had a girl, I remember this question so well, it was the first question I ever got, it was the best one. How do you keep your party on track and not just plot railroad it? Well, it kind of goes into this. You need to have logical repercussions for not achieving your in-game goals. So there's a horde of rampaging orcs that are invading the continent, right? Well, they do a whole bunch of stuff to stop it, but they don't actually really complete it all the way. And they maybe get distracted and go off and like start doing other things. Well, you can have it be where like the local economy's gotten affected. Like certain low-level magic items are no longer available because all of the smaller up-and-coming shops that support that part of the economy have been destroyed or taken over, right? So you can have your big bad evil guy with his army or legion of evilness like actually start attacking the countryside, not just the party. And usually, from what I found is, once you start messing with the party's money and their ability to spend it,
it works. It really does.
It really works.
Yeah, consequences and timelines.
yeah, it's like, yeah, you just found 100,000 gold in this dungeon. Oh wait, you literally can't spend it now because you didn't actually stop the army, and so the city's been destroyed.
But do provide clues that there's a deadline.
Yes.
Because in this example, we were aware of the problem, but
We were busy.
the city officials didn't want to talk to most of the party because we were male characters. It was more like an Amazonian society. So we were like, hey, we're going right here. We'll come back later. Didn't realize it was that guy. And it's now on our to-do list to go save the prisoners who are now prisoners of orcs.
Question, where on that to-do list is it?
It's below Duncan. It's below Duncan. But yeah.
Once again, they don't care about that.
We got about 10 minutes. Question way in the back.
This kind of goes off the previous question. How do you manage like your NPCs and especially your big bad making like decisions that are technically meta? It's like you as the DM know all of the answers and you know if they did this, it's bad party versus a day who isn't good for the party, how do you like make a good balance of what is and isn't?
Of what they know and don't know.
Yeah, and what they should and shouldn't necessarily do.
Survivors. So if the players take out a group of one got away, that one that survived knows the party's tactics. The Doom Vault, it's a module in the Yawning Portal, and it's this massive, it's an entire page of the map. But one of the details of the Doom Vault is there are a whole bunch of little closets, little imp demons that have at-will invisibility. And they're everywhere in the rafters watching, because it's a thriving facility of creatures and evil mages and such. And when the party's doing stuff, they're taking notes. They're like, and they report back to the boss going, hey, you got a crew going through. They use force wall, they use this, in which case now it makes sense the enemy happened. But if the enemy happens to clear or pull an Old Man Henderson, if you ever heard of a story of it, where there's no survivors, well then, realistically, the enemy wouldn't know about those tactics yet. But having witnesses and survivors are ways to give your enemies intel.
That's our biggest insult.
Yeah. Jesus. Now, what I would, if you need an argument for metagaming, my favorite one is, this is the big bad evil guy. As he said on the previous question, I've got spies everywhere. After you came and attacked me, you've now caught my attention, which means scrying spells. I start paying mercenaries to come fight you to test your offense and defensive capabilities. Every time you got looted on a road, that was me. But, you know, that's because I learned how to DM from a guy who likes to make players scry.
Yeah. So my biggest piece of advice is, as long as there's a corpse, the bad guy has information, because speak with dead.
Animate dead.
Yeah, inanimate dead. So like, as long as the big bad evil guy can walk up to one of his dead lackeys and be like, speak with dead. How many were there? Speak with dead. Why did they attack you? Like, speak like, just very general information, like he'll have access to what the party's doing.
They have time.
Yeah, and especially if you give them time, right? Like, and this is the other thing that I think a lot of people struggle with. The hardest part about being a DM is being like an intelligence 10 human trying to play an intelligence 30 lich. Like, it's very difficult to try to emulate the conniving general evil nature of an immortal bad guy. Not a lot of people can do it. It just takes practice. So if you have to kind of just Deus Ex Machina justify the way he learned that information about the party, don't feel ashamed to do that. Because again, like, it's physically impossible for you to become a lich and therefore then think like a lich and then do his things. So just, well, okay, yeah, maybe.
To add to that question, I just thought of one other great answer. Just look your players in the eye and go, because I said so.
That also works too. It's less fun. But
Yeah, it is less fun, but roll intelligence check. You don't know.
It's a story. You want the next encounter with the main villain to be a threat and at their level. Like you said, you don't want the guys coming up with +1 swords, you get the party has +3 swords and armor within their like.
Actually, this reminds me really quickly of one of my favorite D&D stories. A guy who just wanted to stop getting raided by the party members, so he keeps upping his defenses over and over until he finally becomes the big bad evil guy with his own dungeon. Yo, it's a great one.
Yes.
No, the
Definitely.
cabbage.
I always love the joke.
That's
Turn it
literally
into-
all I could do.
There are 2 of those out on the dealer floor right now. So I keep knocking them over.
Alright, I think now we've got about 5 minutes.
Got 5 minutes.
Yeah. So,
Okay, that means 1 question for Dylan and 5 for us.
Question?
How do you help motivate people to realize what their abilities are? I tend to find that most people, at least when they're new for a while, don't really realize what their potential is and like the actual characters, what their abilities are. So is that, how do you help them keep track of those things and remind them without blatantly going, hey, you haven't used, wild shape, and like,
Is how to build their not, you're just walking them through it without realizing it. And, oh wow, this is what I can do. Yeah, you can do that. Or give the moment when the healer can bring the entire party back up. They're like, oh. So definitely one good way to do that, and just talk with them. Work with them. Say, hey man, you can actually, as a fighter, you get action surge. You can do more attacks. So you go in super fast and hit them like 4 times, 8 times in the future. And even show them what's to come. So they go, okay, you can build towards that. And work, be excited with it. Done.
One way I usually like to try is I like to build an NPC with the same power level and set, just to show them what the future of that power could actually become at some point. So, it's like, yes, you might have the level 5 monk, but when I bring in the level 10 monk and I show him what a stunning strike can do with him, it's like, okay, yeah, so I need to start working on trying that.
I agree with what Blake said. Try to design encounters. Try to design encounters in situations where you can help put the spotlight on new characters. I wouldn't tell them specifically what to do, but I would give hints to the party that maybe maybe the druid or maybe the barbarian, like whoever is the new up-and-coming player, they have a solution for this that I, as the DM, have already kind of thought out in my head. We should kind of explore their capabilities, and you guys work together to see if you can mirror the solution that I've thought up and see what kind of creativity you can stimulate. Also, the other thing to add on to that is try to encourage yes and style of role playing and not no but style of role playing, where you encourage the groups to build off of each other's creativity and not shut down their creativity. And so if you have a new character who's constantly getting shut down because their ideas are just a little off-center from what the party wants to do, they're naturally going to recluse away from wanting to RP. But you as the dungeon master, you have to kind of stimulate that, no, these opinions are valid, like these options are actually paths the party can take. You should listen to this person and actually try them every once in a while, right? And sometimes that's going to be, for a lack of a better term, working with a firm hand, because you specifically guide the party into making a decision based off of the shy character. And there's a lot of good that can come from that, there's a lot of bad that can come from that. If that option ends up doing very well and succeeds, it's a positive thing, it can be like a core memory for that person that they associate with the game. If it ends up being a total blunderbuss and shatters and never goes anywhere, you can almost stifle their creativity forever. So try to guide, but be very careful with how you do it.
To add on what he said there at one point, he brought up I have come up with an answer that you guys have in your party. Do not let that dissuade you from allowing rule of cool or creative ways out of one that you're like, oh yeah, I put the key in the room. Yeah, but the barbarian just kicked the door open. Yeah, we're still open.
Yep.
Yeah, a little more creative than that.
You can always brainstorm together. We're pretty much out of time, but it's a quick thing. The commissioner was telling us that actually these doors, we're supposed to open using
those doors coming in, they can exit out any door they want.
Yeah, you guys can exit any door.
If you see us out on the floor, out walking, and you have any questions, feel free to come up and ask. It's after hours. The mall is at the Clarion Inn on Jamaican in room 115. So you can just knock any out.
Yeah. And you have a panel tonight?
Yes, there's the advanced Dungeon Master topics tonight at 6. Back in this room, we're going to be talking about taking your game to the next level, basically.
Bring your Texas Instruments calculators.
Yes.
And then tomorrow we have one more panel of character death and kind of deal with it. Same room, but 12 o'clock.